close your eyes and picture the world. Centuries ago tonight will bring those distant moments back to life, offering a soothing retreat from today's bustle. You find yourself standing before the towering gatehouse of a medieval castle. It looms ahead all gray stone and stubborn cold, like an ancient creature frozen mid-snarl. The drawbridge creaks beneath your feet as you cross it slowly, carefully over a murky moat that smells faintly of damp reeds and regrets. Two guards barely glance at you, one's yawning, the other's picking something unholy out of his ear. The portcullis above looks like it hasn't been oiled since the last crusade, and as you pass under its iron teeth, a faint drizzle begins to fall. Welcome to your new life behind the castle walls, equal parts honor, hardship, and hiding from the draft that whistles like a banshee down every corridor. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to post your location. And local time helps me know where all my fellow sleepy history nerds are drifting off. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through the gatehouse and into the bailey, the open courtyard inside the castle walls. The ground squelches faintly under your boots. It's supposed to be gravel, but heavy feet dribbling livestock and frequent rain have mashed it into a sort of communal soup. You wrinkle your nose and trudge forward. There's a smell to medieval castles, and it's complicated. Think of a cheese you forgot in your fridge combined with wood smoke, unwashed tunics, damp hay, and a generous helping of horse. In the distance, someone is arguing with a goose. The goose appears to be winning. Your eyes drift upward to the stone heart of the castle. Thick-walled, square-jawed, and about as inviting as a tax audit. This is where the lord and his family live. And if you're lucky, or unlucky enough, depending on the day, you might be allowed inside. But don't get too excited. The stone floors are cold, the ceilings leak, and the draft has a personal vendetta against your toes. You enter the Great Hall. The doorway is low. Medieval doorways tend to assume you're either short or willing to duck for social harmony. Inside, it's surprisingly vast. Torches sputter along the walls, casting dancing shadows that make everything look slightly haunted. The ceiling beams are thick, soot-stained, and home to several spiders the size of your childhood fears. The hall was the center of castle life. This is where meals are eaten, visitors are received, and disputes over stolen turnips are resolved. A long wooden table stretches down the middle. Benches flank it, worn smooth by generations of fidgety butts. At the far end, a raised dais holds the lord's chair. Not a throne exactly, but it does have slightly more upholstery and fewer suspicious stains. Even now, there's bustle. A page stumbles past with a tray of ale. Two servants are arguing over how to fix a wobbly leg on a bench, one's suggesting prayer, the other's trying to wedge in a piece of bone. Above them, a faded tapestry flutters gently. It once depicted a glorious hunt, but now mostly resembles a lion being mugged by a shrub. And here's your first reality check. Castles were cold, always cold. The thick stone walls held out invaders, sure, but they also hoarded winter like a miser hoards coins. Fires were few, mostly concentrated in the Great Hall. Bedrooms. Good luck. Even noble ones might find frost on their goblets by morning. To combat this, you'd layer up. Undergarments, wool tunics, maybe a cloak if you hadn't traded it for ale. At night, you'd share body heat like it was currency. Beds were communal family guests, even servants sometimes bundled together under heavy, flea-ridden blankets. Not exactly the solo slumber you might be used to. Now look up there in the ceiling beam. See the iron hook that once held a heavy chandelier of tallow candles. These were expensive and messy. When they melted, the fat dripped down like warm misery onto anyone seated below. Naturally, guests learn to avoid the drip zone. One quirky tidbit: some castle owners tried to battle the gloom with polished metal mirrors placed opposite windows to reflect light. It mostly reflected frustration and the occasional pigeon. Oh, and if you're wondering where you might do your business, hold that thought. That delight's coming in a few sections. For now, just know there's a reason people didn't drink much water, and it wasn't just the fear of drowning. Some historians still argue whether castles were designed more for show or function. Were they really fortresses or just glorified status symbols with an excellent view of their neighbors' sheep? The truth probably lies somewhere between military necessity and noble peacocking. Outside the Great Hall back in the Bailey, life continues. Chickens peck near a blacksmith's forge which rings with hammer strikes and shouts. Children scurry underfoot chasing dogs that may or may not belong to anyone. A knight in training nearly brains himself with a wooden sword. Every surface here's worn boots have grooved the stone steps. Elbows have polished the railings, and even the walls lean a little with age. But there's a sense of pulse. A strange rhythm of clatter-chatter, snorts, and sighs. A strange kind of comfort if you don't mind being slightly damp at all times. By now the daylight has started to dim. The castle casts long, toothy shadows across the yard. A servant rings a bell, dinner will be served soon, and the Lord will appear, likely late, likely hungry, and definitely wearing something that smells faintly of lavender and superiority. You'll find your place at the far end of the hall nearest the door. That way, if you spill something, you can disappear quickly. But for now, just take it all in. The rough stone under your fingers, the clatter of pots, the hint of music in the distance, someone tuning a lute badly enough to make a monk flinch. This is your new world. Cold, chaotic, oddly charming. And as the torchlight flickers along the walls, you feel the weight of centuries settle softly on your shoulders, stone soot and all. You hear him before you see him. A loud voice laughing too hard at his own joke, echoing down the stairwell like a trumpet in a well. That's your lord, the master of the castle, defender of the realm, and occasional over-enthusiastic wine drinker. He strides into the great hall in furs and velvet, his boots clacking confidently on the stone, despite the fact that one of them has clearly been chewed by a dog. Being a medieval lord wasn't all banquets and battle cries. You had land to oversee, taxes to collect, vassals to manage, and some days an ulcer the size of a boiled quail egg. Your position was a mix of politician, landlord, judge, and occasional warlord. One day you're settling a land dispute involving 3 brothers and one tragically confused goat. The next, you're leading 30 men-at-arms to deal with a rival's insult over trench placement. Your castle might feel like a fortress, but it's also a workplace. The Lord, for all his glamour, is constantly tangled in paperwork, or rather parchwork. Charters, petitions, tenant grievances, requests for woodcutting rights. His chamber smells like ink-damp wool and the quiet despair of failed literacy. You peek into the solar, a small, slightly warmer private chamber off the Great Hall. Here's where the Lord does his thinking, planning, and occasional sulking. The fire here burns brighter, and the walls are adorned with painted shields and a suspiciously optimistic family tree. You spot a carved writing desk, several scrolls tied with ribbon, and a pewter goblet with something thick and red inside that is either wine or, given how long it's been sitting, fruit soup. Being a lord also means constant visitors. Vassals arrive with tribute and gossip priests with long-winded sermons and messengers bringing grim tidings about taxes, weather, or both. Sometimes a bard shows up singing poorly veiled songs about the Lord's last hunting accident. The Lord pretends to enjoy it. Not everything is politics and public face. Behind the grandeur, there's a weary man dealing with a never-ending queue of problems. The miller's flooded the grain store, the blacksmith's apprentice has gone missing. A nearby manor claims ancestral rights to your favorite fishing pond. Someone's trying to marry your daughter again, and this time the suitor brought a peacock as a gift. It escaped and now lives in the chapel rafters. Here's a curious detail lords often kept: household knights. Not just warriors, but loyal retainers who ate at his table, rode beside him, and whispered useful things in his ear. They were part honor guard, part private think tank, part occasionally drunk liabilities. And remember, this medieval lords were expected to lead in war, not from a cozy tent in the rear, but right in the mud sword in hand, shouting until their voice cracked. Training for combat was lifelong. If you were lucky, your armor fit well. If you weren't, it pinched something vital and made stairs a nightmare. But what did these lords do for fun, you wonder, hawking mostly? Also hunting, feasting, and occasionally inventing rules for games no one else understood. Some lords tried writing poetry, others collected relics. One lord famously tried to turn his castle into a pilgrimage site by claiming a toenail of St. Rufus had been found in the moat. Historians still argue whether lords had real autonomy or were just overly pampered middle managers under royal control. Technically, they held their land in fee from a higher noble or the king himself, but how much actual freedom they had could vary wildly. A strong lord could rule like a mini monarch. A weak one might spend his days dodging debts and apologizing to angry neighbors. Now take a moment and look out the window. From this height, the world stretches into distant woods and fields, dotted with thatch roofs and smoke trails. All of it, peasants' crops roads, belongs to the Lord. His domain, his duty, his headache. And yet, despite all his power, he's never quite secure. There are always rumors, whispers of rebellion, jealous cousins with old grudges, wandering mercenaries looking for employment or trouble. A good harvest might bring peace. A bad one could turn the villagers' smiles into pitchforks. One fringe tradition: you might like some lords held court dressed as King Arthur, complete with round table fake beards and awkward poetry contests. It was all very noble until someone tripped over a lute and knocked over the wine jug. You stroll behind him now as he makes his rounds, chatting with stewards, scolding a lazy guard, glancing nervously at the still dripping ceiling above the pantry. His authority feels absolute, but it teeters on a knife edge of loyalty, luck, and leftover stew. He passes a mirror. Just polished brass, really, but enough to catch his reflection. He pauses briefly, adjusts the fur on his shoulders, and sighs. You get the feeling he misses something. Youth, maybe, or a time when ruling felt simpler, when sword and oath were all it took to command respect. Now it's ledgers and leaky roofs. He strides into the chapel next, kneels briefly, whispers a prayer. Perhaps for strength or peace, or for someone else to fix the southern wall before it collapses on the sheep pens. Outside, a rooster crows late and wrong, and a pig wanders by wearing someone's laundry. And so your lord continues. Regal yet rattled, respected but restless, carrying the castle on his shoulders even if his back protests every step. You follow his footsteps across stone floors smoothed by generations, echoes fading behind him like the lives of countless lords before each convinced they were the center of the world, even as the world slowly moved on without them. You don't hear her approach. She moves quietly as though she's made of silk and whispers. The lady of the keep. She doesn't announce herself with trumpets or laughter like her husband does. No, she simply arrives already in the room, already halfway through her instructions to a servant, already 4 steps ahead of everyone else. Her presence doesn't need noise, it hums like tension in the air before a storm. Her gown is heavy velvet trimmed with embroidery so intricate it makes your eyes cross. tiny golden lions and curling vines stitched with a patience you can't quite fathom. Her veil is pinned with silver, her shoes hidden beneath layers of skirts, and her face calm, practiced, impossibly composed, like she just spent the morning juggling supply inventories, sick children, and her husband's wandering opinions on grain taxes and came out the other side with her dignity intact. She nods to you, barely. You exist, and for now that's enough. Contrary to the fairy tales, being a lady in a castle wasn't all embroidery and gazing out of windows. It was management. Ruthless, meticulous, exhausting management. When the Lord was away, which was often, she was in charge of everything. The still room was her domain, a strange little chamber tucked away near the kitchens, where she oversaw the brewing of herbal remedies, perfumes, and the occasional love potion, strictly unofficial, of course. You walk in and the scent of dried lavender and vinegar nearly knocks you over. On the table, rows of glass bottles gleam, some cloudy with age, others labeled in looping script you suspect is code for makes your teeth tingle. She knows every servant's name, every child's birth, every missing spoon. If there's a feud brewing in the kitchen, she squashes it before the soup burns. If someone's stealing from the larder, she's already confronted them gently, but with enough precision that they'll be confessing to things they didn't even do. She reads too Latin, if you can believe it. Or at least enough to copy a psalm and quietly correct the chaplain when he misquotes something. Her book of hours, elaborately illustrated, sits on a lectern in her solar, alongside a pair of spectacles so delicate they might snap under the weight of an unkind glance. Here's a niche tidbit castle. Ladies were sometimes trained in estate accounting. Ledgers, tenant records, harvest projections, you name it. Imagine the medieval equivalent of Excel, but with more ink stains and the occasional mouse nibble on the corner. She oversees the accounts with quiet satisfaction and an eyebrow that could freeze a dishonest steward mid-sentence. And it wasn't all domestic duties either. During sieges, the lady might take command of the castle defenses, organizing supplies, directing messengers, even commanding archers. One historical lady, Nicola de la Haye, held Lincoln Castle against repeated attacks and annoyed King John so much he reportedly called her that most cunning and evil woman, which is honestly a badge of honor. Yet for all her competence, her world was limited. Her marriage likely arranged before she could spell her own name. Her lands, if she had any, absorbed into her husband's. Her opinions, unless carefully veiled in politeness and metaphor, often dismissed like flies in the pantry. Historians still argue whether medieval noblewomen wielded real power or just soft influence through male proxies. There are enough letters, accounts, and quiet legends to support both views. Perhaps the truth lies, as it often does, in the middle, where quiet strength outlives loud authority. She passes you in the corridor now, her gown barely whispering against the rush-strewn floor. In her arms, a ledger. At her side, a tired maid and a small child holding a sticky apple, and several important questions about worms. She answers them all with the same patience, the same tone. Calm, assured. Her solar is modest by noble standards, but warm. Tapestries along the wall block the worst of the draft, and cushions scatter the wooden bench where she sometimes hosts informal meetings, arranging marriages, resolving servant disputes, or secretly helping a girl find a dowry. She has a small dog at her feet. It looks like it was assembled out of leftover wool and sneezes. Loudly, she kneels in prayer twice a day, but not always in the chapel. Sometimes just beside her writing desk in silence while the candle burns low and the world spins quietly outside her narrow window. At feast days, she sits beside the Lord, quiet, composed, and dressed like a saint from a stained glass window. But between the courses, you'll notice her eyes flicking across the room, checking on servants watching for spilled wine tracking, who laughs too loud and who eats too little. She knows everything. Another fringe fact: in some castles, the lady kept a set of keys tied at her waist. To the storeroom, the linen chest, the spice cupboard, the medieval version of a general's command baton, silent proof that she and she alone kept the castle running. And then there are her letters. Scrolls sealed with wax dispatched by trusted messengers. Not just family gossip, but land management, political advice, and subtle diplomatic nudges. Some of her correspondence has survived polite, elegant, and edged with iron. You pass her in the garden later, stooping to pluck a sprig of rosemary. She hums quietly to herself an old hymn, maybe, or a lullaby she once sang to a child, now grown and gone. She pauses, brushes soil from her fingertips, and glances toward the horizon. Thinking, planning, remembering. She doesn't speak much. But when she does, people listen. Not because she commands them, but because when everything else falls apart, she's the one who still knows what to do. And as she turns away, sunlight catching on the edge of her veil, you realize this castle, its rhythm, its heart, its breath doesn't belong to the Lord at all. It belongs to her. It's still early and already the castle hums with activity. But not from nobles or knights or even wandering monks. No, it's the servants who move like blood through the veins of this stone body, keeping everything warm, working, and if only barely standing. You wake to the sound of someone tripping over a bucket, a muttered curse. Then hurried footsteps as a scullery boy races across the yard with a bundle of kindling that's already starting to fall apart. His tunic hangs off one shoulder. He's about 10, maybe 11. Definitely too small to be carrying that much firewood, but that's medieval job security for you. Survive the chores or become one. Castle servants come in all varieties. Some are born into it, some are debtors, others are just there having never quite left. Their duties are relentless, repetitive, and mostly invisible, which is exactly how the nobility likes it. In the kitchens, it's already chaos. The cook, broad, flour-dusted, and inexplicably angry at everything, barks instructions with a spoon like a weapon. A pot bubbles ominously. Someone is plucking a chicken with the aggression of a knight in a joust. And over by the hearth, a small boy called a spit-turner sits cranking the roast like his life depends on it. Which quite literally it does. They've been known to fall asleep at their station. They don't do it twice. You slip past a maid scrubbing the flagstones. She's using water that looks like it's already cleaned several disasters. Her hands are red from lye. Her knees never quite stop aching. She glances up just long enough to give you a nod that says, "If you're not here to help, keep moving. Want something mended?" There's a seamstress with thread bitten between her teeth and fingers that move like tiny birds. Sheets to be changed. There's a chambermaid carrying armfuls of straw-stuffed mattresses, sighing deeply with every step. The rushes on the floor need changing too, but that's a luxury. Most days you just sprinkle new herbs over the top and hope no one notices the beetles. Oh, the beetles. And the fleas. And the rats that scuttle through the corridors like they own the place. Which, to be fair, they kinda do. You head down to the storage cellars. It's damp. Always damp. The walls weep. The barrels sweat. Somewhere in the shadows a sack shifts, hopefully grain. Possibly not. A stock clerk stooped and Twitchy records everything with chalk, muttering the inventory aloud. 4 eels, 1 ham, 12 wheels of not yet moldy cheese. Then he pauses. 11 wheels, he corrects. A rat squeaks guiltily in the distance. Upstairs again, a young woman arranges herbs in a bundle. She's the still-room maid apprentice to the lady's concoctions. Her apron smells of mint and garlic. She tells you without prompting that she once helped save a boy's leg from rot using only mustard and goose grease. She's oddly proud of that, and fair enough. Midday brings a small meal which servants eat hastily standing or squatting, wherever there's space. Cold pottage. Some bread if they're lucky, a leftover bone if they're very lucky. No spoons, just fingers, and a vague hope that the cook didn't reuse the pot from yesterday's fish stew. Quirky tidbit here. Castle servants developed an elaborate system of knowing where they stood in the pecking order. The ones who served the lord directly, the chamberlain, the butler, the cupbearer, held special prestige. Lower tier folk. They stayed out of sight and mostly hoped no one remembered they existed until laundry day. One servant, the gong farmer, is never forgotten, though everyone pretends he doesn't exist. He cleans the cesspits, which we'll get to in more horrifying detail in Section 7. Just know that if you smell something absolutely medieval, it's probably him or his bucket. Still, servants form their own community. They swap gossip, share tips on removing wine stains from tunics, whisper stories of ghosts in the tower. One claims to have seen the late lord still pacing the ramparts, muttering about unfinished taxes. Servant children grow up in this world. They run errands, chase chickens, and learn early which nobles are kind and which ones bite if approached before coffee. Some rise if they're clever or lucky to better positions. Some leave. Some simply become furniture. Familiar, silent, always present. Historians still debate how much autonomy castle servants truly had. Were they oppressed or just part of a mutually understood order? Some left behind letters and testimonies showing humor, pride, even affection for their role. Others? Well, others left nothing at all but worn-out shoes and a dip in the stairwell where they always turned. You follow a servant girl now as she lights torches along the hallway. It's late afternoon and the shadows creep up the walls like damp ivy. She's fast precise and sings under her breath a melody older than the castle itself. She pauses to scratch at her sleeve where flea bites bloom like constellations. Later you pass her again. She's sweeping the hall now. The same hall she swept this morning, and will sweep tomorrow. Her eyes are half-lidded, but her broom moves like clockwork. And when night finally drapes itself over the castle, the servants don't rest. They're still there, turning down straw pallets, refilling ewers, stoking fires. One by one, they vanish into corners and crevices like candle flames, flickering out in reverse. You lie down on a thin mattress stuffed with hay that rustles when you breathe. Somewhere beyond the wall, a maid hums, a rat scurries, a fire crackles. The lord may hold the title. The lady may steer the heart. But it's the servants, sooty, silent, and sore, who carry the weight of the castle's breath. You wake to bells, not church bells, those come later. These are smaller, clanging from the kitchens, signaling that it's time to eat. Or rather, time for the nobility to eat and for everyone else to do the feeding. Your stomach grumbles. You've smelled roasting meat since dawn, and it's not getting any easier. You follow the sound and the scent to the great hall, which is already being transformed. The long tables have been wiped down with something that smells like vinegar and disappointment, and the servants are bustling around, laying trenchers, stale slabs of bread that double as plates, and eventually as food for the poor or the pigs, whichever complains loudest. Feasting in a castle is not an everyday affair, despite what movies might tell you. Daily meals are often quiet, workmanlike, and frankly a little dull. But when there's a feast, oh, then it's a spectacle. Today happens to be the feast of St. Ethelburga, who is mainly remembered for healing sick sheep and being miraculously boring. But, hey, a feast is a feast. You slide into a spot near the lower end of the table, far from the lord and his honored guests. That's where the food gets cold, The jokes get louder, and the wine is suspiciously watered down. A servant passes carrying a platter the size of a shield. On it lies a boar's head, grinning glazed and stuffed with herbs and something squishy that might once have been an onion. Behind it, trenchers loaded with pies, birds, and stews, all flavored with spices that cost more than most peasants made in a month. Quirky tidbit nobles love to show off with illusion foods. Think peacocks roasted and then redressed in their own feathers, or pies that sang when opened thanks to live birds stuffed inside. It was festive, dramatic, and probably traumatic for the birds. You reach for your knife, your only real eating utensil. Forks too French, and not widely used in English castles until much later. Most guests just stab, scoop, and hope for the best. Bread is everywhere, but not the soft, fluffy kind you're used to. This is brown hard and designed less for chewing and more for structural integrity. The stew is safer, some root vegetables, a few shreds of meat, and the ever-present whiff of overcooked leek. The Lord gives a toast, long-winded, vaguely threatening to the French, and full of references no one understands but everyone nods along with. Then he tears into a turkey leg with gusto and tosses the bone behind him, where it narrowly misses a dog and a small child, wrestling for dropped turnips. Speaking of dogs, they're everywhere. Under the tables in the corners, sometimes even on laps. Nobles pampered them. Servants tolerated them. You try not to step on one and become part of a different kind of feast. Now here comes the mead. Sweet, heavy, and strong enough to make you question your grip on the stone bench. Mead is the medieval answer to waterborne illness. Water is risky. Mead is safe. Ish. Safer than wine mixed with gunpowder, which was briefly a thing among knights trying to feel brave and instead just ended up confused and flammable. Another strange tradition, hand washing. A bowl of warm water is brought around before meals. Guests dip their fingers not because they're clean freaks, but because greasy fingers and shared bowls are a bad mix. Afterward, you dry your hands on a communal towel the size of a horse blanket. It smells like rosemary and old socks. The minstrels arrive as the second course lands a collection of smaller birds' candied fruits, and something the cook insists is fish, but which smells like surrender. They play lutes, recite poetry, and occasionally attempt bawdy tales that toe the line between hilarious and heretical. Historians still argue whether medieval feasting customs were truly extravagant or simply performative. Some accounts describe days-long banquets with hundreds of dishes. Others suggest those were rare and mostly exaggerated for bragging rights. Like Instagram, but with more grease. The lady of the castle sits with a small smile, picking delicately at a pie and sipping from a cup likely filled with spiced wine. You watch her scan the room, making mental notes perhaps, or counting how many guests are laughing too hard at the Lord's third boar hunting story. Servants move quickly between the tables, refilling goblets, replacing trenchers, and trying to avoid eye contact with drunk knights. One spills gravy on a monk. The monk says nothing but looks like he might write a passive-aggressive psalm about it later. By the end of the meal, the table is chaos. Bones, scraps, half-eaten fruit, and several cups abandoned in various states of despair. Trenchers are gathered, leftovers sorted. Some go to the poor at the castle gate. Some go to the kitchen dogs. Some mysteriously vanish into the sleeves of hungry guests. And you sit back full dazed and slightly concerned about how much cinnamon your body can process in one sitting. The fire crackles. The torches burn low. A minstrel hits a sour note and apologizes profusely to St. Ethelburga. No one notices. This is castle life, at its most festive, most noisy, and most digestive. Tomorrow's meal may be simpler: salted herring, cabbage, a bread crust that doubles as a paperweight. But tonight the castle feasts. And as you rise from the bench and stretch your weary legs, you step over a sleeping hound and duck under a still sputtering torch. Outside, the air is crisp. The stars blink sleepily overhead. Your belly is full. Your boots are sticky. And your head swims with the sense of meat music and the heavy warmth of shared celebration. You awake in the half-dark mouth-dry hair, sticking oddly to your forehead. Something rustled in the rushes by your head a moment ago, but you decide not to investigate. It's probably harmless. Probably. This is your new sleeping arrangement. Welcome to Castle Comfort, the medieval version of it builds character. Let's begin with the room. You're in what passes for a chamber, though room-shaped chill might be more accurate. The walls are stone, of course. Thick, cold, and weeping condensation like they're trying to apologize for their own existence. There's a narrow arrow-slit window blocked halfway by a rag that was once optimistically a curtain. It sways gently in the wind, which is also swaying. Inside, because insulation is a myth. Your bed, if one could call it that, is a wooden frame straining under a straw mattress. And that's being generous. The straw crunches when you move. It pokes when you don't. A few beetles have set up a neighborhood in the southeast corner. They seem polite enough. Over the straw lies a wool blanket, scratchy and coarse, dyed in a color that might have once been red. You've wrapped yourself like a cocooned sausage only to discover that your nose, ears, and toes remain uncomfortably exposed. The only real heat comes from your own breath bouncing back in your face like warm, damp mist. Now, if you were of nobler blood, you might be sleeping in a proper bed. A real one. With thick feather mattresses, silk sheets, embroidered pillows, and bed curtains, those long, heavy drapes designed to trap warmth and privacy. But even those beds didn't keep out everything. You'd still hear the wind, still feel the draft through floorboards, still swat at fleas the size of lentils. Here's a quirky tidbit: beds were often shared even by people who weren't married or particularly close. Space was limited and warmth was precious. Travelers bunked with each other. Servants nestled near fireplaces. Entire families layered themselves in bed like medieval lasagna. And if you're picturing peaceful slumber, think again. The night in a castle was a noisy affair. Mice in the walls. Creaking wood. Distant howls. And from somewhere always the deep, phlegmy snore of a knight who drank too much mead and thinks his nasal passages are battlegrounds. You creep out of bed to use the chamber pot, a small clay vessel that sits beside the bed, daring you to miss. You try not to think about where it gets emptied. Hint: gravity is involved. More in Section 7, you've been warned. Back in bed, you try to sleep again. But now your mind is racing. What if the beetle invites friends? What if the wind blows the curtain right off? What if the snoring knight starts sleep jousting? Historians still argue about the average medieval person's sleep patterns. Some suggest they had segmented sleep, two shorter sleeps broken by an hour or two of quiet wakefulness. During this time, people might pray, read chat, or stare at the dark wall, wondering why their feet feel like frozen ham. Others claim it was just whatever sleep you could scrape together between lice and livestock. If you were rich, or at least richer, you might have a warming pan. A metal tray filled with coals passed beneath the sheets before bed. It helped briefly until you either got burned or set the blanket on fire. Some accounts mention heated bricks or stones. More economical, more dangerous, equally disappointing. Some noble households even had bed tester servants who warmed the bed before their master climbed in. Think of it as a preheated mattress with a pulse. Cozy for the noble. Awkward for the servant. You lie there now, silently grateful that you aren't responsible for someone else's mattress warmth. You pull the blanket tighter. Listen. A dog barks, a door creaks. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cries, probably hungry or cold, or just philosophically opposed to being alive in the 1300s. Another fun fact, pajamas weren't really a thing. You slept in your linen undershirt. Some slept naked. Others wrapped themselves in everything they owned. Modesty varied wildly by status culture and whether your bedroom door actually latched. And the beds themselves. Well, some were carved masterpieces with Latin inscriptions and family crests. Others were little more than hay on a board. One traveler once complained that his guest bed at a northern castle had so many fleas he felt half gnawed by the devil's own teeth. That traveler later became a monk. Coincidence? As for nightlights, forget it. You had a candle if you were lucky. If not, you navigated your nightly business by moonlight memory and sheer hope. Most chose not to wander after dark, not just for the cold, but for the risk of stumbling into something worse, an angry goose or rat king, or a noble's pet monkey who thinks your nose is an intruder. Eventually your body gives in. The straw becomes tolerable. The cold becomes less of a shock and more of a dull presence, like a pet ghost sitting politely in the corner. You drift finally into dreams. Maybe about sunlit meadows. Maybe about being warm. Maybe about beds that don't poke back. And just before sleep claims you, you think somewhere beneath this same roof the lord and lady are asleep in a grander bed. The servants are curled beside the kitchen hearth, and the mice are tucking into a sack of barley with great enthusiasm. This is a medieval castle by night. Stone walls, heavy dreams, and sleep that comes not as comfort but as surrender. You wake up needing to pee. Again. Which is deeply unfortunate because, as you may recall, indoor plumbing hasn't been invented yet. You sit up grimacing at the stiff straw beneath you and glance toward the chamber pot. It's still there, still full. Still a slightly terrifying experience in low torchlight. And now you face a decision: use the pot again or brave the castle's built-in bathroom system. Welcome to the world of garderobes, the medieval castle's answer to a flushing toilet minus anything that resembles sanitation. You wrap a cloak around your shoulders and shuffle toward the garderobe. The corridor is dark, the torches half burned, and the stones cold underfoot. A gust of wind finds its way through a cracked arrow slit and delivers a helpful reminder that your cloak is more fashion than function. Finally, you reach the garderobe, a small stone room, jutting off the castle wall like a strange suspended outhouse. Inside, a wooden bench sits over an open chute that drops straight down the castle wall into, well, whatever's unlucky enough to be below. Sometimes a pit, sometimes the moat, sometimes you don't want to know. You sit, you do not relax. The seat is cold. The wind howls up the shaft like an offended ghost. You stare straight ahead, trying not to make eye contact with the damp moss growing on the walls. And yes, it smells. Not constantly, though. The drafts help. A bit. Still, it's a pungent mix of human activity, rotting food, and time itself. Garderobes were placed in clever locations, overhangs built into the outer walls near bedrooms, even above passageways, a decision that led to unfortunate accidents and hasty apologies. Nobles might have a private one with wooden paneling and a little shelf for herbs or bizarrely jewelry. Some thought the ammonia-rich air helped keep moths away. Others just didn't think very hard at all. And what did you wipe with, you ask? Excellent question. The answer: moss rag straw or your left hand, depending on availability and social standing. There's no charm in here. In fact, one recorded method involved using a smooth stick with a cloth wrapped around it, a gomp stick. We'll let your imagination fill in the rest. Carefully. Here's a quirky historical tidbit. Some castles featured garderobe chutes that emptied into the moat. which meant the defensive ditch surrounding your castle was not just full of water, but also less than delightful extras. So much for a refreshing morning swim. And someone had to clean all this. Enter the gong farmer, perhaps the least envied job in the entire medieval world. These brave souls were tasked with emptying cesspits and transporting night soil to nearby fields or disposal sites. They worked at night for obvious reasons. They were paid relatively well, which tells you everything you need to know about how undesirable the role was. One such worker once described his job as the labor of Lucifer, with smells more potent than sin. Not the sort of tagline you put on a business card. You finish up quickly and retreat from the garderobe like it might follow you. Back in the corridor, you pass another servant carrying a bucket of sloshing something. She's humming, clearly desensitized. Either that or she's gone nose blind from proximity. Historians still debate how clean or filthy castle life truly was. While some argue that regular cleaning, herbal strewing, and careful management kept the worst at bay, others point to archaeological findings, cesspits near kitchens, rat skeletons in walls, and parasite evidence in skeletons as proof that castles were more biohazard than bastion. You pass a corridor where rushes cover the floor, herbs like lavender and rosemary mixed in to mask the more unpleasant scents. They do their best, but underneath the old rushes rot slowly. Layers build up. Mice nest in them. Bugs throw parties. Every few weeks, someone sweeps it all out and lays down new ones, pretending this resets the smell. It does not. By morning, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen starts to overpower the other smells. Sort of. You breathe in deeply. Toast, yeast, smoke, and just a hint of ancient sewage. It's the castle equivalent of morning dew. You stop in at the laundry area next because, believe it or not, they did clean things. Sort of. Clothes were boiled in lye or soapwort beaten against rocks or scrubbed on wooden boards. Then rinsed in cold water, wrung out by hand, and left to dry over hedges ropes or near the hearth. That explains the smell of wet wool that clings to every corridor like a ghost in mid-molt. Interestingly, linen undergarments were cleaned more regularly than outer garments. They were easier to wash, quicker to dry, and most importantly, closer to your most fragrant bits. Wool tunics. Washed maybe once a season if they hadn't disintegrated by then. You hear the bells ring for morning prayers. The castle begins to stir. More servants carrying buckets. A child complaining about the cold. Somewhere a rooster has wandered indoors and is now yelling at a tapestry. You pass another garderobe, this one built directly into the wall, its chute leading out and down straight into a suspicious-looking drain. The moss around it glows faintly. You choose not to ask. A servant girl sprinkles dried mint over a pile of rushes. She grins. "Smells better already," she says with a wink that tells you she knows it's a lie but appreciates your shared commitment to pretending. And that's castle sanitation in a nutshell. A mix of engineering, herbal magic, and raw optimism. So next time your modern bathroom feels small or the plumbing groans when you flush, remember the garderobe. Remember the wind, the moss, the pot. The desperate prayer that you don't drop your only pair of hose down the shaft. And then smile. Because compared to this, even a gas station restroom feels like a spa. It starts with the thud of hooves on the packed earth outside. Then a metallic clatter, then shouting. Not angry shouting, more like the kind that happens when someone's just whacked their shin with a practice sword. You step out into the castle yard to find it alive with movement. Men-at-arms are sparring near the stables. Pages are chasing each other with wooden shields. A knight stands at the center of it all, barking instructions and adjusting the strap of his breastplate like it's constantly trying to escape his torso. Today is training day, which, to be fair, is most days. Life as a medieval knight wasn't all gallant quests and polished armor selfies. It was bruises, it was discipline, it was keeping your sword arm in shape and your horse from eating your gauntlets. You approach the tilt yard a long stretch of dirt and turf with wooden barriers running down the middle. This is where jousts happen, and not the noble, elegant poetry in motion kind you've read about. This is the kind where two armored blokes charge each other on war horses with 13-foot lances and an unspoken agreement that breaking something is part of the charm. A page hands a lance to a knight Sir Edmund, you think, who mounts his horse with a groan. The horse looks unimpressed. The squire counts down. There's a thunder of hooves, a shout, a clash, and then splinters, lots of them. The lance has shattered beautifully across the other knight's shield. Applause breaks out. A tooth flies somewhere. And that's the fun version. In reality, the training is relentless. Sword drills, shield drills, archery practice, wrestling, riding, falling off things, and then pretending it was on purpose. Quirky detail knights didn't just train with weapons, they also practiced mock sieges, climbing scaling ladders, and chucking rocks at each other in controlled chaos. One recorded training exercise involved hauling a wooden castle on wheels and storming it repeatedly until someone cried uncle or sprained something expensive. The armor itself is a marvel of design and discomfort. Made of dozens of overlapping plates or heavy chainmail, it protects well, but weighs as much as a small sheep. Movement is possible, but stairs are cruel, and running is more of a suggestion than an actual strategy. Here's a little-known tidbit knights trained to fall. On purpose. They practiced controlled tumbles, how to hit the ground, and roll how to land without snapping a collarbone. And even then it didn't always work. One knight famously broke 3 ribs during a gentle bout, and insisted he was mostly fine while coughing blood into his goblet. You walk past the armory next. Inside racks of weapon swords in various states of sharpness, axes with lovingly polished heads, maces that still smell faintly of the last tournament. The armorer is a large man with fingers like sausages, and the expression of someone who's heard every sword joke in the kingdom. He's hammering a dent out of a helmet and muttering something about idiots who think headbutts are tactical. And now we come to the chivalry part. You know, honor, courtesy, protecting the weak, that sort of thing. In theory, knights were bound by this noble code. In practice, well, some took it seriously. Others treated it like decorative parchment. Nice to look at, rarely consulted. Historians still argue whether chivalry was a real ethical system or just elite branding how to be violent but fashionably. The truth seems to sit somewhere between heartfelt vows and carefully staged PR. You pass a young squire polishing armor in the sun. His face is streaked with soot and pride. He tells you without being asked that he once fetched his master's sword in the middle of a skirmish and didn't drop it even when someone threw a cabbage at him. You nod solemnly. That's the stuff legends are made of. The lord of the castle appears now dressed in full regalia, mounted on his destrier, sword raised. He's hosting a mock tournament. Pages cheer. Minstrels strike up a brassy tune. A flag is waved. The knights charge. It's glorious. Dust flies. Hooves thunder. Shields clash. And within moments someone is face down in the mud moaning that they've swallowed their dental wax. You watch from the sidelines, soaking in the energy. This is as much entertainment as it is preparation. The castle gathers for such events, ladies waving kerchiefs, old knights reminiscing loudly, young squires dreaming of their turn in the saddle. But beneath the ceremony lies serious purpose. Warfare was frequent. Bandits, rival lords, border skirmishes, peasant revolts, it never really stopped. A knight had to be ready, fit, alert, able to strap on 60 pounds of steel and charge headfirst into the kind of melee that makes dentists rich and historians busy. Another fringe fact, some knights carried battle manuals filled with illustrations of how to disarm opponents, stab around a shield, or wrestle someone in armor. It's like medieval jujitsu, but with more plate mail and fewer sponsors. As the tournament winds down, the injured are carried off mostly fine, and a few knights gather to toast with watered wine and brag about how little they felt that last blow to the ribs. You sit by the tilt-yard fence now watching a squire trying to coax a horse back into its stable. The horse refuses. The squire pleads. The horse snorts, turns, and trots triumphantly toward the kitchen garden. It's a noble life, this knighthood. Hard, painful, full of mud splinters and the eternal gamble of glory versus broken limbs. You stretch your sore limbs and imagine yourself in chainmail. For a moment, you feel heroic. Then the wind shifts and you remember how awful it is to sleep in armor, or walk in it, or relieve yourself in it. And just like that, you're back to watching, which honestly feels safer. You hear it before you see it. Salve puer. Quae hora est. A groan follows, then the unmistakable sound of ink spilling where ink should not be. You peek into the small stone chamber and see the chaplain, slowly wiping his face with a rag that already gave up an hour ago. Latin class is in session. Welcome to the medieval castle schoolroom. Or more accurately, a room where small boys try very hard not to fall asleep while learning about things they barely understand in a language nobody actually speaks. Education within the castle walls is limited, focused, and deeply biased toward the upper class. If you're a noble's son or an especially promising squire, you might be lucky enough to get lessons. If not, well, hope you're good with a shovel or a sword. The chaplain is your teacher today. Stern, tired, and always 5 minutes away from losing his temper. He's teaching Latin grammar using a dusty manuscript and a pointer he wields with the intensity of a minor warlord. Today's lesson: conjugating irregular verbs, which even in the 1300s is no one's idea of a good time. The boys ages 10 to 14 sit on benches too hard for comfort. One is nibbling the end of his quill. Another is sketching a very unflattering picture of the Lord on his parchment. The third is asleep with his eyes open, a rare and dangerous skill. If they're lucky, they'll move beyond Latin and tackle reading, writing, scripture, and arithmetic. If they're very lucky, they'll be taught history, mostly stories of kings and saints, all heavily revised for political comfort, and maybe some rudimentary astronomy, which is often just astrology wearing a smarter hat. Quirky fact, some castles employed clerks who doubled as teachers and scribes. These men might spend the morning copying legal documents and the afternoon trying to explain to a teenage noble why Latin has genders and why sell a chair is inexplicably feminine. Over in a corner, a squire's practicing his penmanship. He's gotten as far as Deus Vult before smudging half of it with his sleeve. He sighs and starts again. Writing is slow and precious. Ink is made from oak galls and iron salts. Paper is rare. Most work is done on parchment animal skin, scraped smooth and expensive enough to make mistakes truly painful. The girls. Well, education for them was far less common and depended entirely on status. A noble daughter might be taught to read so and recite prayers, especially if she was being groomed for convent life. But beyond that, the ceiling was very low unless her mother insisted. Or she lived in an unusually progressive household with a soft spot for curious minds. Historians still argue whether medieval education was widespread among the nobility or limited to the rare enlightened household. The truth lies somewhere in between. Some families valued learning. Others saw it as an inconvenient distraction from falconry and looking impressive in a tunic. Back in the schoolroom, the chaplain asks a question. One boy raises his hand. The answer is incorrect, but delivered with such confidence that the chaplain pauses, squints, and mutters something about creative theology. He awards half a point. After lessons, it's time for manners. Yes, chivalry has to be taught too. You watch as the boys awkwardly practice Beau's table etiquette and the noble art of pretending to enjoy a sermon. One accidentally elbows the other. A third tries to curtsy for reasons unclear to anyone, including himself. There's a game to learning here. Punishments are mild but memorable, usually involving standing against a cold wall or cleaning out the chapel's candle stubs. One poor soul once had to recite Psalm 23 backward while hopping. It didn't go well. And of course, there's music. Some boys are taught basic chants. Others learn the recorder lute or vile medieval instruments that sound faintly like a cat thinking out loud. One boy strums a few notes and then yelps as a string snaps and smacks him on the knuckle. Another winces in solidarity. You wander into the library such as it is. 2 shelves, 3 chained books. One of them is a bestiary full of creatures both real and invented. Another is a book of saints' lives, including one who allegedly glowed in the dark. The third is a translation of Aristotle that appears to have been annotated by someone very angry and very bored. The chaplain lets you hold one. Just for a moment. The vellum is soft but stiff, like holding a piece of history that still resents you for touching it. The ink smells faintly metallic. The margins are filled with tiny drawings, some devotional, some depicting questionable dragons. You leave the schoolroom and follow a few of the boys into the training yard where they swap parchment for wooden swords. Learning here is full body. Muscle memory bruises. One boy recites his Latin declensions between swings. Another just swings and hopes for the best. Quirky tidbit in some castles. Young pages were expected to learn table service as part of their education. Where to stand, how to pour, how not to trip over the Lord's dog while carrying a roast pheasant. These lessons could make or break a career. You notice a boy kneeling in the chapel, later reciting a lesson to himself. He fumbles over the Latin, but keeps trying. The chaplain passes and pretends not to hear. Behind the altar, a candle flickers, illuminating a carving of Saint Augustine, who also looks confused by Latin grammar. The day ends with vespers, evening prayers, and a quiet return to dormitories or pallet beds. The boys settle down tired, still whispering about tomorrow's lesson or tomorrow's sparring, or the rumor that one of them saw a ghost near the well. You lie down, your thoughts thick with the scent of ink, candle wax, and wet parchment. Learning in a castle isn't easy. It's slow, awkward, and often deeply uncomfortable. But for those who make it through, it's a door to knighthood, stewardship, or even the church. Not bad for a boy who once inked his nose during Latin drills. The bells ring again, this time in soft, steady tones that echo through the stone like breath through a flute. You pause mid-step in the corridor, as do others. Heads bow slightly. Conversation dims. It's time for prayers. Life in a medieval castle is stitched together by religion. Morning, noon, night, there's a prayer for everything. A rhythm set not by clocks, but by church bells and tradition, and a constant background hum of incense, Latin hymns, and the low drone of psalms. You follow a small line of people, servants, squires, even a few visiting merchants into the castle's chapel. It's not grand, not like a cathedral, but it's beautiful in its own way. Arched stone walls, wooden pews worn smooth by centuries of elbow-stained glass, so thick with dust it glows more than it shines. At the front, a candle flickers beside a wooden crucifix, its wax running in lazy rivulets like it too is weary of the hour. The chaplain enters dressed in vestments that smell faintly of lavender and mildew. His voice rises in Latin words you recognize more by sound than meaning. Some around you cross themselves, some mumble along, some just close their eyes and sway to the cadence like a lullaby hummed by a very scholarly ghost. Religion isn't optional here. It's not a hobby. It's the air, the calendar, the explanation for every crop failure, every recovery, every suspicious mole that might mean the devil's been sniffing around again. Each day is tethered to a saint. Today it's Saint Cuthbert, patron of, well, something important probably. Tomorrow will be someone else. Their stories hang on the walls in tapestry form, grim martyrdoms, miraculous healings, and the occasional dragon slaying, always metaphorical, unless you ask Brother Thomas, who swears he saw one once during a fast. The chapel isn't just for prayers, it's for marriages, christenings, confessions, and burials. It's where feasts begin and arguments end. It's where the noble family kneels in velvet and fur, and where the kitchen boy huddles in the back row, hoping God's too busy to notice the spoon he borrowed. You spot the lady of the keep in her usual seat near the front. Her eyes are closed. Her fingers move over the beads of her rosary with the calm repetition of someone who's done this every day of her life. Behind her, the Lord shifts uncomfortably. He's not quite used to sitting still this long. And then there's the relic. Every decent chapel has one. This one is a sliver of St. Eustace's femur. Maybe. It's housed in a silver reliquary shaped like a miniature church and guarded by a very bored-looking altar boy who's probably memorized every crack in the floor by now. Pilgrims sometimes visit to see it kneel before it asks for healing or guidance or just a moment of hope. Quirky tidbit, the relic isn't always real. Some are bought, traded, or mysteriously discovered during renovation. But no one questions it. Faith doesn't require proof, just a story with enough dust on it. After the service, the chapel clears slowly. Some linger to light candles for lost loved ones. Others hurry off to chores or breakfast. The chaplain remains wiping the altar with deliberate care, humming a hymn that's been passed down longer than anyone can remember. You find yourself in the castle's oratory, a private prayer room for the noble family. Smaller, quieter. Here the lady sometimes meets with her confessor. Here letters are read aloud, decisions weighed against conscience. The walls are lined with painted saints. Their faces are oddly serene, their halos glowing even in the dark. You sit for a moment. The cushion beneath you is slightly damp, as most things are, but the quiet is soothing. A rare peace. Outside the chapel, life resumes. A carpenter hammers a new beam into place. A servant girl yells something about a missing chicken. Somewhere, a baby starts crying and a nursemaid begins the slow process of pretending she doesn't hear it for just one more minute. And yet you'll hear the bells again. At noon, at twilight, at night. Each one a pause, a breath. A reminder that life, with all its mud and noise and mead and manure, still kneels regularly, reverently before something greater. Historians still argue about how devout medieval castle dwellers truly were. Some accounts describe sincere piety people who lived and breathed scripture. Others suggest religion was performative, tangled in politics, superstition, and social expectation. Most likely it was both. Sincere in the morning, strategic by sundown. One castle record shows a knight praying for victory before battle, and then bribing a priest to ensure his opponent wasn't doing the same. Spiritual insurance, if you will. You walk the perimeter now past small shrines tucked into alcoves. One is dedicated to St. Margaret, patron of childbirth. Another to St. George, whose dragon slaying always seemed to include bonus detail depending on the storyteller's imagination. Another fringe belief, certain saints were considered better at specific requests. Lost keys, St. Anthony. Toothache, St. Apollonia. Unfaithful spouse. There's no official patron for that, but several wives have tried St. Jude, patron of lost causes. The day winds on. Another service approaches. This one shorter, quieter. Evening prayers. You slip in once more, the last rays of sunlight casting rainbow fragments across the floor from the stained glass above. The chapel fills again with words light silence. A servant sneezes. A knight snores briefly before being elbowed awake. The candles flicker like nervous thoughts, and for a moment, just a moment, the castle breathes in unison. A single heartbeat of devotion beneath layers of stone, steel, and sweat. You leave the chapel with your thoughts trailing behind you like incense smoke. Faith here isn't a choice. It's the rhythm of life, the glue in the cracks, the whisper behind every door. You return to your room. The bell has stopped. The sky is deepening into velvet, and far above a single star peeks through the clouds, soft, silent watching. The castle's quieter now, but not still. You hear a chirp, then a hiss, then a flapping of wings, and finally a very unimpressed squawk that sounds like it could have come from a feathered knight. You follow the noise to the mews tucked between the outer bailey and a crumbling wall where ivy has started to win its siege. This is where the falcons live. Not just falcons, actually. Hawks, kestrels, maybe even the occasional owl. The castle's feathered elite. Falconry is the medieval noble's version of golf. A pastime, a status symbol, and a reason to wear gloves that cost more than most people's beds. The birds are hooded, tiny leather caps cover their eyes, calming them, and making them look oddly philosophical. The falconer is there, of course. A wiry man with more scars than fingers and the calm of someone who speaks more bird than human. He nods as you approach, then carefully unhoods one of the birds. It blinks, stretches its wings, and regards you like you've just insulted its lineage. This is Lady Muriel's peregrine. Her name is Silence, and she once took down a crane the size of a barrel. According to rumor, anyway. Birds here tend to collect stories the way knights collect dents. Training these birds is delicate, repetitive, and slightly terrifying. A wrong move and your nose becomes a perch. A right move and you get the satisfaction of watching a hawk dive from the sky like divine judgment, then return to your wrist with a feathered shrug. But falconry isn't just sport, it's also diplomacy. Gifts of falcons are exchanged between nobles like others exchange wine or insults. A well-trained bird is a token of respect, or power, or if given with a certain smirk, an elegant threat. Quirky detail falcons were so valued that they often had their own servants' diets and medical treatments. Some even wore miniature silver bells so you could hear your doom descending from the sky. You walk past a row of cages and see another favorite castle pet a greyhound, lounging like it pays rent. These elegant dogs were bred for nobility, swift and slender, and prone to sighing deeply whenever someone tries to pet them without permission. And then there are the less noble pets. Cats roam the kitchens, tolerated for their rodent hunting skills and feared for their unblinking judgment. One black cat stares at you now, tail twitching. You nod respectfully. It does not return the gesture. Dogs abound, big mastiffs for guarding small lap dogs for warming feet and showing off. A fluffy little creature named Pickle belongs to the steward's wife. He wears a ribbon and once tried to chase a knight's horse. The horse was unimpressed. Pickle now walks with a limp and even more pride. Inside in the pantry, something skitters. Pests are part of castle life. Rats, mice, weevils, fleas, they're everywhere. The kitchen staff lays traps. The steward orders new barrels because one was found half-eaten. And every so often the cook declares war on the vermin banging pots and threatening to call in the falconer. A fringe tidbit. One medieval method for flea control involved placing a bowl of warm blood beside the bed to lure them away. Effective questionable, gross unquestionably. You wander past a servant changing rushes on the floor again. Underneath beetles scatter. She sighs, tosses herbs over the new layer, and mutters something about Saint Gertrude, patron of rodents. Some castles even had mongoose-like creatures imported from abroad to battle snakes or rats. Others kept monkeys. One castle record mentions a baboon that escaped during a feast and was last seen wearing a bishop's hat. Historians remain divided on whether that was metaphorical or literal. Back in the courtyard, a stable boy chases a chicken. The chicken is winning. A goose watches from the shadows plotting. Geese, by the way, are excellent guards, loud, aggressive, and too bold for their own good. Several castles swore by them. One legend claims a goose saved a lord from assassination by biting the ankle of a cloaked intruder. The goose was promoted. The intruder was not. As the sun begins to lower, you catch sight of a heron taking off from the tower. It soars wings wide, drifting above the battlements like a slow sigh. A knight nearby watches it absently stroking his falcon's feathers. Not bad, he mutters. For a swamp bird, the mews grow quieter. The falcons are fed and hooded again. One squire is nursing a scratch that looks suspiciously like it came from a bird who wasn't quite ready. You retreat into the keep, passing a cat asleep on the stairs, a hound stretched across the hearth, and a pile of feathers that suggests a falcon escaped its leash and found a new hobby. This is the animal life of the castle, half pet, half partner. Noisy, smelly, occasionally majestic. They comfort, they hunt, they guard. They also steal food, ruin floors, and get more affection than some of the knights. You settle by the fire. A dog curls up beside you. A cat jumps into someone's lap, stays for exactly 4 seconds, then vanishes into the dark like a judgmental ghost. Outside, an owl hoots, the falcons sleep, the rats scheme. And above you, all the castle breathes alive, not just with people, but with claws, wings, whiskers, and the endless chaos of creatures who never once worry about rent. It starts with a horn low, mournful, and just ominous enough to make your stomach sink before you even know why. Then comes the second horn, then the third. You're in the courtyard when the guard shouts from the battlements riders on the eastern ridge. A few moments later, too many banners. It's not friendly. And just like that, the entire mood shifts. Jokes stop. Bread is dropped. A boy grabs his wooden sword before remembering it's not helpful. Somewhere behind you, a dog starts barking, because of course it does. This, you realize, is the beginning of what every castle dreads: a siege. Now, sieges are rarely dramatic all at once. They're slow creeping things. War by starvation, fear, and hoping your walls are thicker than their patience. You're hurried toward the great hall. The drawbridge is raised, the portcullis slammed down, the outer gates barred. The bailey fills with organized panic barrels, rolled doors, bolted people shouting about sheep still outside the walls. The Lord appears, grim-faced armor hastily strapped over a tunic that still smells like last night's feast. He calls for calm, for discipline, for a record of exactly how much salted pork is in storage. A scribe starts counting nervously. You get a crash course in Siege Prep Medieval Edition. First rationing. Everything edible is gathered, cataloged, and counted twice. Grains, salted meat, beans, onions, barrels of pickled something. The kitchen maid makes a face that suggests hope is already lost. Fresh food. Not anymore. The gardens are inside the walls but barely productive. The chickens will be gone in days. The pigs will hold out longer if they're not stolen by hungry guards first. Water is the real issue. Some castles have wells inside the keep. Others have to rely on rain collection or underground cisterns. If yours doesn't, well, I remember that moat. It's not potable. Not unless you enjoy dysentery with your rebellion. Boiling oil. Less common than movies suggest. It's expensive, dangerous, and far too flammable to be worth the drama. Heated sand or melted lard are more likely. Still effective. Still terrifying when poured from a murder hole onto someone trying to scale the wall. Quirky fact, some castles used beehives as weapons. Dropped on attackers, they'd unleash chaos. One account tells of a siege broken by a single hive hurled from a tower that landed directly on the captain's helmet. He survived. His dignity did not. Down in the yard, masons are reinforcing weak spots. Archers are checking their bows. Buckets of arrows are carried to the battlements. Someone finds a crossbow and acts like they invented it. The chapel fills with whispered prayers. A relic is paraded around the walls just in case divine intervention is taking requests. As the day wears on, you catch sight of the enemy encampment banners, fluttering campfires glowing, and a lot of sitting around. Because here's the secret of most medieval sieges: they're boring. A waiting game of attrition interrupted only by occasional shouts and the smell of someone cooking better food than you are. You climb the tower and peer over the wall. Below, a group of enemy soldiers wave cheerfully. One moons the castle. Someone beside you mutters, "Charming." Then you see its siege equipment being built. Slowly, purposefully. Ladders, battering rams, maybe even a trebuchet if they're feeling dramatic. You try to remember how strong your gates are. You wish you hadn't asked. Inside the castle, people settle into siege routine. Days blur. The same stew, the same prayers, the same anxious glances. Morale starts to shift like bad weather. And then come the rumors. They poisoned the well. They tunneled under the wall. They captured a goat and are demanding surrender. That last one turns out to be true. It's Lady Marjorie's goat and she is not amused. You hear arguments. Should we try a sally? A sudden attack from inside to damage their siege engines risky? Could break the siege. Could just get you killed. The Lord weighs his options. He sends out a few scouts. One comes back. He doesn't say much. Historians still debate whether castles were truly effective defensive structures or simply psychological ones. Many sieges ended not in glorious assaults but in quiet surrender terms negotiated, hostages exchanged, grudges bookmarked for future revenge. Still, some castles held out heroically. Months, even years. One famous case, Rochester Castle held through starvation disease, and part of the tower collapsing from fire beneath. The defenders simply moved to the other half and kept going. Night falls. Torches flicker. The archers take shifts. You sleep near the kitchen, curled beside a barrel of beans and hoping not to be drafted. Then midnight. A crash. Shouts. You leap up. One wall has been breached not by brute force, but by clever hands digging a tunnel. The defenders rush to repel them. You watch through a narrow slit as swords flash in the moonlight, shouts echo, and a pot of hot pitch turns the tide. The enemy falls back. The hole is blocked. The wall holds. For now, you sit in the tower the next day, tired and dusty. A pigeon lands beside you. You think about eating it. It thinks about pecking your boot. You both decide to wait. Sieges are hunger, tension, waiting. They reveal everything: strength, weakness, courage, cowardice. Some survive, some don't. Most are changed. A few days later, word comes reinforcements are on the way. The enemy packs up just like that. No final battle, no glorious victory. Just the clatter of hooves retreating and the slow return to something like normal. The castle exhales. People cheer. A pig escapes in the celebration. No one stops it. You look out from the tower. The fields are trampled. The moat smells worse than usual, but the walls are still standing, and so are you. Another siege survived. It begins with a whisper. Not the kind that flutters through hallways after bedtime, but the kind carried behind hands through tapestries and under the clatter of trenchers. You pass a group of servants who immediately stop talking when they see you. One of them starts sweeping air. Suspicious. There's something brewing. Not outside the walls this time, but inside them. Intrigue, scandal, politics with a dash of panic. The castle has caught the scent of its favorite sport gossip. You turn the corner into the solar and overhear the steward whispering about a troubling inheritance issue. In the chapel, the chaplain mutters about forged signatures and suspicious donations. In the stables, the grooms are discussing which noblewoman was seen barefoot sneaking out of the Hawkery Tower at midnight. You do not ask for more details. This is the shadow world of the castle court politics romantic affairs. Hidden alliances and the constant game of who knows what and who's pretending they don't. You start with the inheritance drama, a classic. The Lord's brother died mysteriously on pilgrimage in a tavern in Truth, but no one mentions that. And now his son is claiming rights to half the estate. There's no will, there's definitely a lot of opinions. And worst of all, someone has brought up Salic law, which no one actually understands, but everyone agrees sounds impressive. The lady of the keep is quietly meeting with the family priest and her cousin, who is also a lawyer or at least owns a very dusty book and squints a lot. They're debating whether the cousin's handwriting is convincing enough to discover an older will tucked away in a disused cupboard you pretend not to hear. Meanwhile, down in the servant quarters, the housekeeper is trying to figure out who keeps stealing rosemary from the garden. It sounds trivial, but she's convinced it's connected to the incident with the broken locket. No further context is given. She just stares off meaningfully. Quirky tidbit locks of hair, embroidered handkerchiefs, and lace cuffs were popular tokens of affection or evidence depending on who finds them. The right item discovered at the wrong time can start a feud, or a duel, or an engagement, possibly all three. You stroll past the great hall and hear raised voices. The Lord is in conference with the visiting baron. They're arguing about land boundaries that haven't mattered in 2 generations. Maps are slammed on the table. Someone shouts, but the stream moved. Someone else shouts, no. You move the stream. A jug of wine is spilled. The page refilling cups begins to sweat. Outside, the steward intercepts a messenger who arrived late and muddy. The letter he carries is sealed with red wax and scented. That's not good. Scented letters are never good. You learn later that it's from the bishop's clerk suggesting the chapel's recent alterations may have violated sacred proportions. The chaplain goes pale. He's the one who had the wall moved to make room for his collection of imported candles. And then there's Lady Eleonora. She's the visiting cousin. She arrived 3 weeks ago and hasn't stopped smiling since. People don't trust it. She gives gifts too freely, compliments too generously, and knows exactly who's sleeping in which tower. The falconer swears she asked him about the guard rotation schedule twice. Historians still argue whether castle intrigue was a constant feature or a periodic nuisance. Some sources depict castle life as full of petty rivalries and whispered schemes. Others insist that records exaggerate and most castles were simply too busy surviving for meaningful skullduggery. The truth likely depends on the castle and the personalities inside it. But gossip serves a purpose. It's information. Social glue. A pressure valve. The cook knows who argued at lunch. The chambermaid saw the torn letter thrown in the fire. The night squire caught his master sneaking back through the postern gate after midnight and noticed his gloves were missing. And that brings you to the romantic entanglements. The third son of a visiting lord has been seen lingering near the herb garden at dusk. Coincidentally, the baker's daughter has been walking her dog more frequently despite not owning a dog. The nursemaid is watching them both with the practiced eye of someone who's seen this story end in hastily arranged marriages and suspiciously timed pilgrimages. Another fringe tradition: when lovers couldn't speak openly, they used symbols. A dropped glove, a garland of certain herbs, a carved pattern in wood. It was all charming until someone confused parsley for time and proposed to their cousin by accident. By twilight, the great hall is full. The Baron has stormed out. The steward is pretending not to notice. Lady Eleonora is complimenting the chaplain's singing voice, which is the most unsettling part of the evening. You sit near the fire and listen. Around you, the servants pass quiet jokes. The minstrel plays a cautious melody. Two noblewomen play chess, each pretending not to be excellent at it. And in the shadows, the whispers continue. This is castle life behind the curtain. Nothing written in stone, everything etched in glances. A dropped spoon, a turned head, a smile that lasts too long, a silence that answers more than it should. It's politics without titles, romance without promises, power without armor. And just before you drift off, you overhear a servant say, "The lady sent her falconer to the bishop's clerk again." The other servant nods. "Told you, it's always the falconer." You fall asleep wondering if it really is always the falconer, and decide that yes. Yes, it probably is. There's a clinking that doesn't match the usual rhythm of the kitchen or the clatter of the hall. You follow it ears alert until you reach a low archway leading into the workshops, the underappreciated engine room of castle life. Here, away from the glitter and drama upstairs, tools sing and hammers speak. The air smells of hot iron, fresh wood, and wet stone. Sparks flicker in the corner, cast from the blacksmith's forge, where a shirtless man with arms like tree trunks is reshaping a horseshoe that apparently wasn't quite right. Given the volume with which he says this, no one argues. Blacksmiths in a castle are more than horseshoe specialists. They make nails, hinges, tools, weapons, armor, and anything else that needs to be metal and not fall apart immediately. Today, he's also making arrowheads, dozens of them, each shaped with rough speed and a practiced eye. His apprentice is attempting to bellows the forge while sneezing from the smoke and getting yelled at in two languages. You wisely stay out of reach. Past the forge, you reach the carpenter's shed. A maze of plank shavings and the gentle scent of sawdust. A man in a leather apron is smoothing the leg of a chair like it insulted his mother. He pauses to check the measurements on a new door being made for the south tower. He's muttering about that drafty hallway again. Third time this month. Carpenters repair floors, build scaffolds, make furniture, and occasionally patch up wagons or siege ladders. It's practical magic, quiet, steady, often taken for granted. You run your hand along a newly sanded beam. The surface is so smooth it feels like silk made of tree. Over in the far corner, the mason works in near silence. He's carving a block of limestone into what looks like a gargoyle or an owl, or maybe both. His fingers are chalky. His eyes squint like they've never met sunlight on friendly terms. When asked how long it'll take to finish the tower's cracked lintel, he grunts in syllables that seem to mean when it stops raining when I feel like it, and never all at once. Masons are the sculptors of the skeleton. They rebuild battlements, repoint crumbling mortar, and wince whenever someone says, "Just patch it for now." Quirky detail medieval masons sometimes left hidden mason's marks, tiny symbols carved into stones to identify their work. Sometimes they were functional, sometimes secretive, sometimes closer to graffiti. One castle bears a repeating snail etched behind several chimneys. The meaning is lost, but it delights everyone who finds it. In another nook, you find the Fletcher's arrow makers. A woman sits at a bench aligning goose feathers with tiny movements and a mouthful of pins. Her child sleeps in a basket beneath the table, completely unfazed by the nearby hammering. Each arrow must be straight balanced and capable of delivering medieval displeasure at 100 yards. Next to her, a young man is working on bowstring, stretching sinew and testing tension with alarming twangs. The steward sticks his head in, grumbles something about more hunting arrows, and vanishes again. Then there's the tanners and leather workers whose work you smell before you see it. The scent of treated hides, lye, and fermented urine makes you pause at the doorway and decide you'll admire their craft from a respectful distance. Still, someone's got to make saddles, belts, boots, scabbards, and the mysterious number of drawstring pouches nobles keep misplacing. Further along the wall, you spot a room lined with tools and delicate scrolls, the scribe's chamber. A man in ink-stained robes is bent over a piece of vellum, painstakingly copying a land grant in handwriting so elegant it borders on sorcery. A half-finished illuminated initial glows with gold leaf. You lean in and see it's a goose standing on a barrel holding a banner. You decide not to ask. Scribes weren't just writers, they were legal clerks, archivists, and sometimes even engineers. Their skills preserved contracts, recorded disputes, and ensured no one accidentally inherited the wrong half of the orchard. Historians still argue about how self-sufficient medieval castles really were. Some say they were miniature towns, producing almost everything needed within the walls. Others insist they were more dependent on local villages and trade networks than we'd like to romanticize. In truth, it varied. Some castles had thriving internal economies. Others relied on outside specialists and the occasional traveling craftsman with a cart of miracles. Back in the yard, a cooper is finishing a barrel. The iron hoops clang into place and he nods with satisfaction. Barrels are everything: storage, transport, even seats. One child is currently using one as a horse. The cooper doesn't mind. You pass a candle maker melting tallow in endeavor that smells like old socks having an existential crisis. He nods and gestures at a rack of drying candles. They look cheerful enough now, but you know they'll burn unevenly, sputter with resentment, and drip wax on someone's dinner within a day. And let's not forget the brewer humming in his cellar as he checks on several bubbling barrels of ale. Brewing is a fine balance of ingredients, luck, and not letting the rats fall in. His assistant stirs a vat with the stick taller than she is, muttering something that might be a recipe or a prayer. Possibly both. As the afternoon wears on, the workshops begin to slow. Tools are cleaned, fires banked, scrolls rolled up, wood shavings swept into the corners. The sounds of hammers give way to footsteps heading toward the evening meal. You pause and look back. Here beneath the feasts and politics and banners is the true backbone of the castle, the craftsmen, the artisans, the patient builders. Their work is everywhere, even if their names are not. The chair you sat on at breakfast, the window shutters that kept last night's wind from stealing your dreams, the gate hinge that didn't squeal today, the candle that burned just long enough for the steward to finish his tally. It's all made, maintained, mended, and tomorrow it will be again. There's a loud crash followed by the unmistakable sound of giggling and the rhythmic thump of small feet sprinting away in opposite directions. You round the corner to discover the culprit: a tipped-over bucket of soapy water, a startled chicken, and a small boy pretending he didn't just cause both. Welcome to the world of Children in the Castle, a chaotic ballet of scraped knees, broken reeds, and elaborate games involving sticks, shouting, and rules that no one actually follows. Children are everywhere, though rarely center stage. You might not see them during feasts or formal prayers, but rest assured they're behind the tapestry under the table, and definitely the reason the pantry is mysteriously short one apple and 2 honey cakes. Castle children fall into 2 main camps: noble-born and servant-born. Their lives are vastly different, but their bruises surprisingly are not. You start in the nursery tucked into the upper floor near the solar. It's warmer here, the windows smaller, the air thick with the scents of milk, damp linen, and the faint tang of whatever potion the nursemaid swears keeps away the pox. A toddler chews enthusiastically on a wooden horse. Another clutches a rag doll that's been stitched, restitched, and still manages to look vaguely haunted. The nursemaid reigns over this realm. She is part caregiver, part disciplinarian, part walking encyclopedia of every illness a child can have before the age of 5. She's currently balancing a baby on one hip, stirring a pot with the other and yelling instructions to a young girl trying to scrub out a stain that has become over time a permanent resident of the floor. Noble children, if they survive infancy, start formal life early. Boys might become pages as young as 7, serving another noble household to learn manners swordplay and how not to drop goblets on bishops. Girls might be trained in embroidery estate management and the complex art of smiling politely at people they'll one day be forced to marry. You pass a chamber where a boy in a too-big tunic is being taught how to hold a goblet without sloshing its contents onto his boots. The tutor sighs. The goblet wobbles. The boots remain wet. Downstairs, servant children help with chores. They sweep, fetch, scrub, and sometimes disappear for long stretches before returning with a story involving a goat, a hedge, and a very angry goose. The castle expects much from them early, and they age fast in this stone cocoon. But in between, they carve out moments of pure, ragged joy. You wander outside and stumble into a game. It's hard to tell the rules. There's a stick, a hoop, someone's blindfolded. Someone else is pretending to be a dragon. You ask who's winning, no one knows. They all cheer anyway. Quirky tidbit: many medieval children's games have survived in some form. Blind man's bluff, hide-and-seek, hoop rolling, and a chaotic proto-soccer that once caused an entire village to lose its fencing. Literally, the fencing disappeared. Another popular pastime: mock duels. Using wooden swords, kids would mimic the tournaments of their elders. One girl, probably 9, is currently standing on a barrel yelling about honor while whacking a boy with a broom handle. No one intervenes. This is normal. You enter the chapel just as a group of children is being taught the alphabet using an old psalter. One small boy points at a glowing initial and says it's a cat. The chaplain sighs and corrects him, it's Saint Mark. The boy looks unconvinced. Education for noble children depends on rank and ambition. Latin, French manners, chess. For girls, reading, music, spinning. For boys, heraldry, hunting calls, and the unwritten art of looking interested during estate meetings. Historians still argue whether childhood in the Middle Ages was recognized as a distinct phase or simply viewed as a prelude to labor. There's evidence for both. Some records show affection lullabies toys. Others show children entering service or labor as early as 6. Some likely had play, others survival. In the hall, you notice a carved game board, 9 men's Morris, etched into a bench. 2 boys are playing with pebbles. A third watches eating something sticky and possibly illegal. Toys are simple. Dolls of cloth and bone. Balls of stitched leather. Hobby horses, whistles. Miniature shields made from broken pots. One girl proudly shows you her puppet, which is just a stick with a turnip for a head. It has a name, Sir Reginald. You pass a mother nursing her child on a bench near the wall. Her shawl is pulled tight. She hums a low tune that's part lullaby, part prayer. A lullaby her mother once sang to her. One she will pass on. Children in the castle learn early to navigate rank charm. The cook for extra crusts duck out of the steward's line of sight and hide in plain sight during noble arguments. One child is currently napping behind a curtain in the great hall. His siblings are keeping lookout and charging breadcrumbs as bribes. Night falls. The nursery grows quieter. Toddlers are settled. Pages retire to their shared quarters, whispering jokes and dares in the dark. One boy swears he saw a ghost near the pantry. Another laughs and dares him to visit it. 10 minutes later, you hear a crash, a scream, and the loud complaint of a cat being stepped on. You smile. These are the castle's youngest echoes. Loud, sticky, defiant. Learning the walls, learning the people, learning the future. They will grow up here, some to rule, some to serve, some to leave. But for now, they run through stone corridors like lightning in small shoes, dragging laughter behind them like a scarf. And as you return to your chamber, stepping over a wooden horse left on the stairs, you remember every knight, every lady, every steward and scribe. Once threw a stick in the bailey and called it a sword. The morning sun filters through the arrow slits in thin golden blades, catching on the edge of a metal clasp and a very ambitious patch of wool lint. You've been summoned to the wardrobe chamber, a long, narrow room where today's lesson is how to get dressed medieval style. You've never appreciated modern zippers more. The castle wardrobe is a world unto itself. Cabinets of linen, chests of wool, bolts of dyed fabric stacked like flattened rainbows, and somewhere under all that shoes. Always slightly damp shoes. A servant greets you with a curtsy and a measuring glance. "You're not wearing that, are you?" she asks. "You are. Or were." She sighs and begins assembling what she calls a more respectable layer situation. You brace yourself. Dressing in the Middle Ages isn't fast. It's a process. Layer by layer, each with its own laces, ties, and secret methods only understood by people who've spent their lives dressing other people. You begin with your chemise or linen, shift a soft, white, long underlayer. Not fancy, but clean. Or cleanish. The goal here is to protect the fancier layers from touching your body because baths are occasional. Over that comes your kirtle, a fitted wool dress or tunic, depending on your gender and station. It pulls close at the waist flares, slightly below, and feels like wearing a wool hug with opinions. Then, depending on status and weather, you might add a surcoat, essentially a sleeveless overdress. Very popular in the 13th century, still hanging around in closets like a medieval puffer vest. For noble women, the choices grow gowns with long trailing sleeves, sideless surcoats and bodices so tight they might have doubled as chastity armor. If it's winter, good luck over everything comes a fur-lined mantle or cloak so heavy it doubles as a portable sleep aid. Quirky tidbit fashion among nobles got competitive. Some sumptuary laws even dictated who could wear what, so the wrong color or too many pearls might land you a fine. Burgundy velvet for barons. Yes, for your stable boy. That's treason, apparently. For men, fashion often includes a tunic belted at the waist with fitted hose underneath. Not pants. Hose. 2 pieces tied to a linen underbelt, joined at the top only if dignity or cold required it. The result is something that feels like socks staging a takeover of your legs, and the shoes. Pointed, buckled, sometimes laced. Made of leather, soft-soled, absolutely useless in mud. There's a fashion trend now, poulaines with toes so long they curl upward. A servant must sometimes carry the tips to prevent tripping. Practical, not remotely. Fabulous, arguably. You fumble with a belt, and a maid steps in sighing. "This goes here," she says, looping it around your waist, twice tucking a pouch and a knife in for good measure. You now jingle when you walk. If it's a feast day, accessories multiply. Brooches, rings, chains, veils for women. Fur trims, embroidered sleeves. Each stitch a message: I'm rich, I'm important, and I probably have back pain. Over in the corner, a noble lady is getting her hair braided. Her maid works with expert speed weaving ribbons through the braid like she's stringing a crossbow. The end result is a gravity-defying coil that would survive a hurricane. Some women wear Hennen's tall, conical hats that resemble unicorn horns for introverts. Others stick to Wimple's veils or braided buns wrapped in linen. The goal, elegance. The result, sore necks and low door clearance. Men often wear caps coifs or hats trimmed with fur or feathers, preferably from animals that look expensive and annoyed. The castle steward wears a cap so stiff and wide it could be used to direct traffic. Now on to hygiene. You ask where the laundry pile goes? The servant laughs. Clothes aren't washed often. Underlayers, yes. The rest brushed aired out, maybe spritzed with rosewater, sage smoke, or vinegar. The noble class smells like a botanical garden caught in a rainstorm. You catch a glimpse of the laundry yard, later lines of linens flapping like battle flags. Women scrub shifts in large tubs with soap made from lye and rendered fat. Their hands are raw, their arms are strong. Their commentary on castle gossip is razor sharp. Fringe detail perfume was often worn not just for scent, but for protection against bad air, which was believed to carry disease. Some nobles carried pomanders, metal balls filled with aromatic herbs to sniff during suspicious encounters. As the day rolls on, a tailor arrives to fit a new doublet for the lord's youngest son. He's twitching impatiently as the tailor pins the fabric and mutters about shoulder symmetry. The boy tries to escape. The tailor blocks him with a measuring tape and a glare honed by 30 years of noble tantrums. You try to sit down in your full outfit. It creaks. Your knees protest. The sleeves attempt to escape the bench entirely. Eventually, you settle into what you hope is a dignified semi-horizontal slouch. Fashion here isn't just about beauty, it's symbolic. Power, class, allegiance. A red sash might mean betrothal. A certain sleeve style may reference loyalty to a region. Even buttons rare and imported can signify wealth. Historians still debate how widespread high fashion really was in medieval castles. Some argue most nobles dressed practically unless visiting court. Others insist castles were constant theaters of display. Either way, someone is always trying to outdo someone else's embroidery. By evening, you've survived a full day in wool laces and strategic discomfort. A page helps you unlace your sleeves. A maid plucks straw from your hem. The boots take 5 minutes to remove and leave behind a footprint that looks like a medieval crime scene. You stretch. Your skin thanks you. Your knees celebrate quietly. You look down at the discarded tunic, cloak, hose, belt, veil, and shoes. And you wonder how anyone had the energy to scheme, dine, or fight after all that just to look presentable. But tomorrow you'll do it again, because in the castle, appearance isn't vanity. It's armor. You're summoned to the Great Hall not for a feast, not for a sermon, but for something colder, tenser, and potentially more dramatic justice. The long wooden tables have been pulled aside. At the raised end of the hall, the Lord's chair now serves as a judicial seat. Behind it, a tapestry of Saint Michael slaying the dragon flutters slightly in the draught. It feels intentional. The castle is holding court today. Justice in a medieval castle isn't a distant thing. It happens right here, right now, under watchful eyes and worn rafters. If you've stolen, cheated, trespassed, or insulted the wrong chicken, this is where it all gets sorted out. A crowd gathers, equal parts curious and nervous. Servants lean against walls. A few peasants from nearby have been allowed in, one with his hat clutched in both hands, the other glancing repeatedly at the doorway as if escape is an option. The Lord enters flanked by his steward chaplain, and a knight whose expression says he'd rather be somewhere with more ale and fewer peasants. The Lord sits with a sigh and waves his hand. Let's begin. The first case is a land dispute. Two farmers arguing over who owns a strip of pasture where 3 sheep and 1 aggressively territorial goose currently reside. One claims an ancient boundary marker, The other brings a witness, his cousin, who may or may not be sober. The steward tries to mediate. The chaplain offers a quote from scripture that involves vines and oxen. No one is sure what it means. Eventually, the Lord rules they split the land and share the goose. The farmers leave looking like neither won. You blink, that was fast. The second case involves a theft. Someone stole a silver goblet from the buttery. A servant stands accused. She denies it. Her neighbor claims to have seen her near the buttery with a suspicious glint. Someone brings out the goblet now found behind a sack of onions. The servant weeps. The chaplain mutters about temptation. The Lord sighs and orders public penance and 3 days of extra labor. Harsh but lenient compared to the alternatives. Quirky fact: in some castles, punishment could include stocks whipping or even being tied to the gatehouse with a sign describing your crime. Public shame was considered not only correctional but instructive for others. Learn from Bertha. Don't steal goblets. Then comes the trial by ordeal. Yes, it still happens. In this case, a young man is accused of slandering a knight's honor. He denies it. The knight insists he's lying. The chaplain suggests a trial by hot iron. Everyone groans. The accused must carry a glowing piece of iron a set number of steps. His hands will be bandaged and inspected 3 days later. If the wounds are healing clean, God has spoken innocent. If not, well, no one expects perfection from sinners. You ask quietly whether this is fair. A servant shrugs. Fairness. That's for God to decide, then she nudges you. But between us, hot iron usually means guilt. Some castles used other ordeals: cold water, blessed bread, or even duels. One famous case involved 2 squires fighting over a mule's ownership. The duel was stopped halfway when the mule wandered off on its own. Ownership was awarded to neither. Historians still argue whether these ordeals were truly believed to reveal divine will, or simply a method of controlled resolution in a world with few legal tools. Some records show nobles stacking the odds with bribery or rigged tools. Others show communities truly believing justice had been served by a clean bandage. Meanwhile, the scribe sits in the corner of the hall writing everything down. His ink is running low. His expression suggests he's been copying the phrase dispute over sheep for several decades. He stops only to correct a steward who misspeaks the name of a tenant's grandfather. The next case is weird. A duck is brought forward. Well, not the duck itself, but a dispute about it. A boy insists the duck is his. His neighbor says the duck wandered into his coop, therefore it's now his duck. The duck, indifferent, quacks once and poops on the floor. The Lord decides after a full 2-minute consultation with the chaplain and one baffled knight that the duck will remain in the castle for now. The steward will observe who it follows, and the rightful owner will be determined by duck loyalty. This becomes known later as the quack dispute and is recounted at mealtimes for months. Another fringe tidbit: some castle lords held court on a special justice bench, or even under a justice tree in the bailey, especially when weather allowed and the accused were particularly smelly. You watch as the final case begins. It's more serious: a marriage dispute with accusations of broken betrothals, unpaid dowries, and a knight who may or may not have promised affection to 2 sisters and a merchant's daughter. The merchant is present. He is not smiling. The chaplain offers to mediate privately. The Lord declines. The knight is fined. The sisters roll their eyes in unison, and the merchant's daughter surprisingly announces her intention to join a convent. Applause is politely stifled. As the sun drops lower, court ends. The Lord stands, joints creaking audibly. The crowd begins to disperse, buzzing with commentary. The duck quacks again. You exit the hall with the others stepping over the spilled onion sack from earlier. 2 boys are reenacting the ordeal with a spoon and a potato. One insists he's the innocent party. The other pretends to be the iron. Justice in the castle isn't perfect. It's swift, loud, unpredictable. It relies on memory, rumor, scripture, and a dash of pageantry. Sometimes it works, sometimes it just moves things along. But today the Lord ruled. The goblet was found. The duck lives in the courtyard, and somewhere in the chapel someone's praying their bandage looks clean in 3 days. You wake to the faint sound of a drum and the unmistakable wheeze of someone attempting to tune a lute with one hand and eat a pear with the other. Something festive is brewing. Today the castle is hosting entertainers, minstrels, jugglers, and wandering players. And the whole place is just a little brighter, a little louder, and a little more chaotic than usual. You rub your eyes and follow the trail of tambourine jingles toward the great hall. The atmosphere has shifted from grim to gleeful overnight. Rushes have been swept, torches relit, and benches rearranged into something resembling an impromptu theater. A large tapestry has been pulled down, possibly as a makeshift curtain, possibly because someone spilled ale on it. In the center of it all, a minstrel troupe unpacks their instruments. One's tightening a drumhead. Another is adjusting her harp, trying to get the echo just right. A third is aggressively arguing with a sack of costume props, which keeps trying to roll toward the fireplace. You find a spot along the wall next to a steward, who's clearly only here because the Lord insisted on a good showing. He folds his arms, then taps his foot. Quietly, in rhythm. Minstrels weren't just musicians. They were storytellers, satirists, news spreaders, and the closest thing to late-night comedy the castle had. They told tales of great battles, saucy love affairs, and absurd saints who talked to birds or turned wolves into monks. The first tune begins a lively melody about a knight who mistook a donkey for a dragon. The room chuckles, then laughs, then roars. Even the chaplain smiles before pretending he didn't. Between songs, the jester appears face-painted bells, jingling limbs, flailing with exaggerated grace. He performs a tumbling pass, finishes in a bow, and announces that the kitchen has accidentally cooked a fish with 3 heads. It's a joke, probably. Probably. Quirky tidbit jesters were allowed to insult nobles without fear of reprisal as long as it was funny. One jester during a particularly grim winter suggested the Lord heat the hall by setting fire to all the poorly written love poems from his youth. The hall laughed, the Lord nearly smiled. In the corner, 2 puppeteers prepare for their set. Their stage is made of crates and colored cloth. Their characters include a suspicious bishop, a hen that lays gold coins, and a devil that looks suspiciously like the castle's tax collector. The steward predictably does not laugh. After the puppet show, a fire eater performs. The hall gasps, children squeal. The chaplain crosses himself aggressively. The lady of the keep whispers something to the Lord, who waves it off. It's just lamp oil, he says. He is, of course, completely wrong. Then come the dancers. 3 women, 2 men, all in brightly dyed tunics. Their steps are fast, precise, and just chaotic enough to make everyone scoot back from the edge of the performance space. The music grows wilder. A noblewoman claps along. A servant spills wine. A small dog begins barking rhythmically. You're pulled into a circle dance. No use resisting. Hands join. Feet shuffle. Laughter grows. The song repeats. You stumble once. The jester catches you and whispers, "That's nothing. Last week a monk dislocated a rib doing this." The dance ends in a swirl of cloaks and breathlessness. The hall erupts into applause. Even the knight who hasn't smiled since Candlemas looks vaguely amused. Afterward, the minstrels move from table to table playing gentler tunes. Love songs, laments, ballads of distant lands with impossible names. One song tells of a maiden who married a bear. The bear turned out to be a prince. The prince turned out to be a disappointment. Historians still debate how much influence these performers had. Some say they were mere background noise musical wallpaper for noble indulgence. Others argue they shaped public opinion, spread news between courts, and preserved oral history in ways scribes never could. Regardless, tonight they are the pulse of the castle. You sneak outside for air and find two jugglers practicing by torchlight. One is balancing an apple a dagger and what might be someone's hat. The other is eating a pomegranate and claiming he once performed for the King of Aragon. You decide not to question him. Another fringe fact, some castles hosted seasonal festivals inviting entire villages inside the walls. These events blurred the lines between noble and peasant knight and minstrel, serious and silly if only for a day. Back in the hall, the feast begins. The minstrels play on. Between courses, a storyteller recites an old epic. His voice rises and falls like a tide, drawing the listeners in, swaying their imaginations. No one moves. Even the dogs seem to pause mid-lick. You sip from a cup of weak cider and feel something strange contentment. In a castle filled with tension, rules, and frost-bitten mornings, laughter has elbowed its way in, noisy and welcome. As the evening winds down, a bard plays a lullaby. Soft, simple, a melody older than the stones. People begin to drift away full and sleepy. One noble snores gently into his sleeve. A squire tries to propose to the falconer's apprentice and falls off a bench. The jester covers him with a tablecloth and bows. You retreat to your chamber, the music still echoing faintly in your ears. Tonight there was no war, no taxes, no arguments over ducks. Just song stories and badly timed juggling. And in this moment, the castle feels not just fortified, but alive. You wake with the light of dawn slicing through a narrow slit in the wall, painting the floor with a stripe of chilly gold. The air smells of damp stone, old wool, and faintly wet hay. You stretch beneath your scratchy blanket and sigh. The seasons have shifted again. In a castle, the changing seasons are more than a background detail, they shape everything. Food, comfort, chores, even moods. Stone doesn't insulate. It just holds on to whatever misery the weather offers. And right now, that misery is winter. You pull on your stiff boots and shuffle into the courtyard. It's quiet. Too quiet. The kind of stillness that makes every creaking door and every sneeze echo off the walls like a cannon. The ground is frozen, the breath of passing servants visible in the air, and the laundry lines look like they've been abandoned in an avalanche. A stable boy limps by teeth chattering, whispering that the water troughs froze solid. Again, you hear the clang of someone breaking ice with a mallet. Somewhere a horse snorts in complaint. Somewhere else a man yells that he's lost feeling in his eyebrows. The castle in winter is an endurance trial. Fires burn low, fuel must be rationed. Woolen cloaks are worn even to bed. Everything is damp, your pillow, your bread, your soul. Inside in the kitchens, root vegetables reign supreme. Turnips, onions, parsnips, occasionally a carrot. The cook refers to them as her tubers of tolerance. Meat is salted. Bread is stale. The beer is cold and not in a good way. You pass a group of servants rubbing their hands near a brazier. One says spring will come soon. Another mutters, "That's what you said last winter." They both laugh and immediately begin coughing from the smoke. Quirky detail. In winter, people sometimes slept with their animals. Not out of affection, but out of desperation. Chickens, dogs, even pigs. One monk's diary casually mentions sharing his cot with a goat named Beatrice during a particularly brutal January. Beatrice apparently snored. Then comes spring, slowly like a shy visitor. The snow melts into mud. The chickens lay again. The herbs poke up from thawing soil, greeted like long-lost friends. The castle buzzes with renewal. The steward walks the grounds with his tablet noting, repairs fallen slates, crumbled mortar, rotted timber. The carpenter's assistant mutters that the south wall is more hole than wall now. The mason nods sagely and says it's historically interesting. In the fields just outside the castle, plowing begins. Oxen pull through the wet earth while peasants trudge behind their boots, sinking with each step. Seed is sown. Children chase worms. The sky is gray, but the mood lifts. You notice small changes, less coughing in the mornings, more laughter at dinner, a slight return of optimism in the steward's posture. A traveling merchant arrives with new spices and a barrel of something that smells like hope and cinnamon. Then comes summer, hot, busy, relentless. The castle doesn't rest. Hay is cut. Grains are harvested. The air smells like sweat and cut grass and slightly overwhelmed livestock. Clothes dry faster. Tempers rise faster too. The kitchen grows stuffy. The great hall becomes a refuge, its thick walls keeping the worst of the sun out. Servants whisper that last summer a chicken cooked itself in the courtyard. Probably an exaggeration. Probably. The river nearby becomes the favorite escape route. Boys splash in the shallows. Nobles ride out for hunts. Laundry maids accidentally drop cloth in the water and linger to cool their ankles. Another fringe fact. Some castles installed awnings or canopies in the courtyard during summer to block the heat. Others simply retreated to shaded gardens or nearby forests. One particularly dramatic lord moved his entire household to a cave for 2 weeks every August. His steward wrote 3 complaint letters. None were answered. Autumn is a feast and a warning. It brings harvest festivals, barrels of cider, and piles of apples. The smell of baking drifts through the keep. Music returns to the courtyard. There's dancing laughter and a brief golden warmth that feels like a reward for surviving everything else. The pantry fills. Garlands hang in the hall. Bread is better. Even the ale seems less judgmental. But beneath it all, there's a hurry. Wood is chopped, cellars stocked, wool mended. Because winter lurks just around the corner. Everyone knows it. No one says it. The lady of the keep walks the gardens with her maid, picking the last of the herbs and tucking them into linen bags. The lord counts barrels in the cellar with his steward, and a candle that sputters ominously. The cook begins muttering about pickling. Again, historians still argue how much the seasons truly shaped castle operations. Some say castles were adaptable, self-contained worlds that could weather any change. Others claim seasons brought predictable patterns of hardship and abundance, each shifting the power dynamic slightly. You look around and believe both are true. In winter, the fireplace rules. In spring, the garden does. In summer, it's the stables. In autumn, the pantry. The center of life moves with the weather like a silent partner no one can ignore. Tonight, you curl near the fire, a mug of spiced ale warming your hands. Outside, leaves fall. Somewhere, a dog sneezes. You've survived another cycle, another wheel of the year. And tomorrow it begins again. You wake to silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that settles like dust in abandoned corners. Something has changed. You walk the familiar corridors, the ones that once echoed with music. Laughter hammers footsteps, and now there's only the hush of age. No fire crackles in the great hearth. No servant bustles with linens. No dog barks at your ankles. Just you and the slow breath of a castle that has grown still. This is what happens when a castle outlives its purpose. Time has turned. The wars are different now. Gunpowder has arrived. Stone walls once impenetrable now tremble before cannons. Fortification strategies shift. Nobles move to manor houses, warmer, lighter, less concerned with arrow slits and more with windows that actually open. You run your hand along the wall. It's the same stone, but it feels faded. A tapestry still hangs sun-bleached and moth-nibbled. A chair leans slightly, its cushion deflated, as though tired of waiting for a lord who never returned. The last feast was years ago. The kitchen hasn't smelled of meat or ale in decades. The bread oven is crumbled. The storage cellars, once meticulously inventoried, now host mushrooms and the occasional brave mouse. You step into the armory where rust has crept across every surface. Swords are pitted, helmets sag. The once proud banners now droop like old memories. A training dummy slumps in a corner, still braced for a strike that never came. Quirky detail many abandoned castles became quarries. Locals chipped off stone for barns, bridges, chimneys. In some places, a noble's grand staircase now supports a sheepfold. One castle's tower is now a church bell tower. Another was converted into a grain silo. In the chapel, the altar still stands, though the crucifix is cracked. Candles haven't burned here in generations, but the smell of beeswax lingers like faith, or maybe just nostalgia. You pass through the solar. A faded book of hours lies open, its ink smudged, its margins covered in spider webs. You wonder who read it last, what prayer they whispered, whether they too felt the castle slipping into memory. Then comes the rain, a soft, persistent tapping on the roof above. It trickles down the stone through forgotten cracks past the edges of broken windows. Moss flourishes where a heraldic crest once gleamed. Historians still debate how the decline of castles should be seen. Was it a fall from glory or a natural evolution? Some say castles were always temporary tools of power that adapted or disappeared. Others see their slow decay as symbolic, as if the very stones grieve their lost purpose. You climb the tower one last time. The stairs are uneven. A bird scatters as you reach the top. From here, the view is still magnificent: rolling hills, tangled woods fields that were once enemy territory and now just grow barley. Below, the outer wall is breached. Nature has begun her reclamation. Ivy climbs, roots push. Rabbits nest where knights once patrolled. In one corner of the yard, a tree grows, small, twisted, defiant. Perhaps planted by a child who once lived here. Or perhaps it simply took root on its own in soil soaked with memory. You return to the great hall. The dais still rises. The Lord's chair still stands dusty, sagging but stubborn. You sit in it for a moment. It creaks beneath you, not quite breaking. And in your mind you see it as it was. The fire blazing, the banners fresh, the servants rushing, the laughter loud, the bread warm, the minstrels singing of saints and fools and glorious battles, the lady of the keep watching all from her seat, a glass of wine and hand secrets behind her eyes. You blink, the vision fades, dust settles. The castle is quiet once more. Another fringe detail: some castles became romantic ruins visited by poets and painters who wept over broken towers and carved initials into what remained. They saw loss. They saw beauty. They saw history paused mid-sentence. And that's what this place is now, a pause, not an end. The stone remembers, the air remembers, you remember. You step outside as the rain begins to fade. The sky is gray, the grass wet. A bird calls from the tower. A rabbit watches you from under the old chapel stairs. The castle is no longer a home, no longer a fortress. But it is not forgotten. You linger a little longer. The castle, empty though it is, doesn't push you out. It waits with you, quiet, vast, and softened by the passage of time. You walk the grounds once more, slowly now, tracing the familiar places that once pulsed with daily life. Past the old kitchen garden where herbs have long since gone wild. Mint tangles with weeds and rosemary clings to a stone wall like a last act of defiance. Through the bailey, once alive with chatter, now silent, except for the breeze that nudges an abandoned cart. Its wheel leans cracked, giving in after centuries of loyalty. The cobblestones beneath your feet are uneven, worn to smoothness by boots that have long since turned to dust. You step into the nursery chamber. empty cradles, a sunbeam slanting across a tiny stool. You half expect to hear giggles a lullaby the impatient scuff of small shoes, but only the rustle of wind responds. In the armory, the last spear leans against the wall like someone meant to return for it and never did. And the chapel, oh, the chapel still holds its breath. The air here feels different. Not holier, just older. Sacred in the way of quiet places. The light falls through cracked, stained glass painting, faded saints across the stone floor. Dust motes drift like incense. You sit in the back pew and close your eyes. Somewhere beneath it all, you can still feel them. The footsteps, the voices, the breath of those who lived here. Their stories seeped into the mortar. Their choices engraved in grooves on the stairs, scorches in the hearth initials, carved on a beam in the loft. You rise and return to the courtyard. The rain has stopped, the sky has opened, and you realize you are ready to go. Not because you're done with the place, but because the place is never really done with you. It's in your clothes now, your thoughts, the very rhythm of your step. You came to learn what life was like in a medieval castle. And you did. You lived among the stone and smoked the feasts and whispers. You rose with the bells and fell asleep under fur and straw. You watched seasons pass through window slits, learned to read a lord's mood. By the weight of his sigh, learned which stair creaked most and when to listen and when to pretend not to. You became part of it, and now gently it lets you go. You take one last look at the gatehouse, the towers, the chapel roof now patched with moss. Then you step outside, and the castle stands behind you as it always has, waiting for the next story. Let your breathing slow now. You've wandered far tonight through halls once bright with flickering torchlight, across courtyards where frost bit your nose and laughter echoed in the dusk, through kitchens that steamed with stew and soot chambers filled with lace and linen towers that watched the seasons turn like clockwork. Castles weren't just stone, they were alive, filled with voices, tasks, traditions. Imperfect, uncomfortable, beautiful in the way that only something lived in can be. And now, as that imagined world softens in your mind's eye, let it settle. Let the clamor fade. No more hooves in the yard, no more dogs under the table, no more minstrels striking the final note. Only the hush of old walls, only the fire burned down to embers, only the sense that somewhere far away this castle still waits under the same stars you're sleeping beneath tonight. Feel your breath deepen. Feel your body rest. You've traveled through time and silence and stone, and now you've returned with just enough of that world lingering to color your dreams. So sleep now. Let the torches go out one by one. Let the drawbridge rise gently against the night. And let your mind curl into peace like a cat in the solar's warmest patch of sun. I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.